pitch this. We chatted with Paul Hunter last week around trying to do something in this time, share. It's a good opportunity for us all to communicate. Otherwise, we have so busy lives that we don't get the chance. So I just thought I'd use this opportunity to share some of the experiences, some of the trends in the game that we've seen, particularly obviously World Cup, and hence the title, Learnings from the World Cup. I'd like to make it as interactive as possible. I don't think we want to sit here and listen to me talk for 30 minutes. So please, as Nathan alluded to there, type some questions in. Hopefully, as I go along, Nathan and different people can interject. Maybe Paul can interject and ask me some questions as we go along. I think that the first thing I should put some background down to the lead up to the World Cup, and I think some of the challenges at the top end level for us as a nation, being where we are positioned in world rankings, and compared to where we've been in the past. And I think major challenges for us have been the fact that we haven't got a professional domestic game. There's a lot of really good community rugby. There's a lot of good grassroots rugby. Universities doing their piece. It's just at the end of that schooling period, is there a pathway for potential good rugby players to become professionals? And that's the way the game is at now. The top 20 countries in the world will have professional domestic games, or the players playing in those competitions in large numbers. And it's a big ask for us to step up and to be competitive and win against teams that have been professional players all their lives, since 16 in many instances. Even the Uruguays, who have a formula of a centralized group, basically 30 players training together every day. Believe me, they become a team. They're more difficult than most international teams, because the challenge at coaching international rugby is the amount of time you have with the players. It's always a challenge. We'll come to that a little bit more. So those were the main things for us to look at when we got here, is how do we beat Uruguay in a qualification period with probably, it was publicized at the time, the first time we'd had all the available players, top level players that were overseas contracted, and to turn up and win 2 games with 5 days preparation. So that was a challenge. We failed at that one. And then, of course, we had the repechage to look forward to as another opportunity for us. And at that point, Rugby Canada will say we were very supportive. And we felt that the best way for us to have a chance to make sure we qualified for 2019 Rugby World Cup was to centralize 20, 25 players, and then add in, of course, our very good overseas players to that group, and make sure we had some team. Because the culture and team cohesion piece is the biggest thing I've learned before the World Cup, is that cohesion. Continuity with the group, number of tests they played together, and continuity with coaches. I think Moff is listening in. When I first came, Moff was coaching with me. Unfortunately, couldn't stay any longer. Another job. Francois been involved. The turnover in coaching has been very difficult for the players, and that's something we have to be better at in the next 4-year cycle. We need continuity there. Obviously, we need suitably qualified coaches, guys with experience, guys that know what it's like to be in a professional environment. Hopefully, at a World Cup, you need World Cup experience throughout your coaching group. But that storming, norming, forming takes a time, just for coaches, let alone for players. So they were the big challenges along the way. And when we got to the repechage, I felt that we had become a team, continuity with coaches, and we obviously achieved our goal. And then we had another 10 months where we needed to prepare for a Rugby World Cup with some pretty impressive teams in the same pool. And of course, we won't dwell too much on it, but the game we actually looked at and talked about for 12 months was obviously to beat Namibia, was our main target, which is a team we felt at the same level of us as us, of course. And unfortunately, that was taken away from us through other circumstances. So that got us to where we got to. But as I say, the biggest learning for us over the next 4-year period is to make sure we have players that are skilled to play international rugby by a pathway to be competitive at international level and play professional sport. The second thing is, do we have a front 5 big enough and physically strong enough to compete at international level? And the third challenge is the challenge for our overseas players. We have 6 players playing overseas, maybe 7 or 8 that you could count playing at a bit of lower level. And they face some tough challenges because what we need is meaningful games in between World Cups, really meaningful for those players to want to play in. And they are in a situation where they can earn good money and money to set them up for life. And some players have the choice between, in one instance, an Argentinian player, for example, has been offered 22,000 euros net a month. And if he goes and plays for his country, then there's a clause in his contract, he loses 10,000 a month. Now, I know that's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money to walk away from, but those are some of the challenges facing our players. They want to play for their countries, but they know they also will lose money. And also there's the pressure of not getting a contract at those clubs if they leave for international periods. And we're working hard with World Rugby to try and change that. So the light at the end of the tunnel for us, I will move into the World Cup stuff and the learnings from that, but the light at the end of the tunnel for Canada particularly is that the MLR is an opportunity for our players to go and play. We've got 51 players playing in that competition, obviously not right now, but that was where we were a fortnight ago, which is great news. It's a daily training environment, and it's a chance for players to have a ball in their hands and to be in the gymnasium for 6-7 months of the year and playing in competitive matches. There's the Pride program, where we've got young players. Not all want to be in school, not all are at school. We also school them while they're in the Pride program if they can come here. It's not all the best under 20 players in Canada. They're all over Canada. But for those ones who can make that program, is a pathway for those guys. And hopefully that pathway leads to MLR. It teaches them how to be professional, how to be a professional sportsman as much as anything else, and creates a culture, behaviors and cohesion and continuity in our language, if you like, right throughout the 20s, 18s and the Pride program. They're the two big pieces. And of course, the other pieces, our 20s program is really healthy. People being involved there, Gethin Watts, Dr. Pat Parfrey, I don't want to miss any names, Jeff, Adam Roberts, they're doing a fantastic job. When I first arrived, unfortunately, 2 years ago, we had 2 fixtures a season. That isn't a 20s program. We're up to 12 to 15 this year. Of course, that's in the wind now because of the situation we're in with the virus, but that is a proper program, and that is really healthy and will grow our players for the future for both 7s and 15s. By the way, obviously, this is all based on our men's program for the World Cup. This is what this conversation is based on. So a lot of good things going on with the girls as well. But they are critical factors for us, and then we align those programs. So is there any questions on anything I've said there that anyone would like to ask around that? And because I'll move into the rugby stuff is what we're really interested in, and the trends that I'm seeing in the game. And this morning also, I just got off the phone to Byron Hayward, who's the Wales coach, and just looked at comparisons from Rugby World Cup to Six Nations as well, just themes of the game. We'll move into that. Has anyone got any questions on what I just said there, Nath?
Yeah, so there's been a couple of questions around the development program, and I think a lot of questions around what role will MLR have in player development over the next 4 years, and is it a high enough standard, are the two kind of questions around MLR?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a real question. You see us all being very positive about the MLR, but the reality is it's where I would say the championship in England was 10 years ago. It gets better every week. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of the coaching experience, the logistics around what they do, the travel. It isn't what you would expect from top 14, pro 14 Super Rugby by any standards in terms of its professionalism. But as I said, everyone there is working very, very hard. And I'll be honest, I didn't think I'd be saying this 2 years ago, but in 5 years' time, if it keeps on the trajectory it's going, the investment from World Rugby and from the obviously the owners of the franchise there and owners, and it's going to grow, and it's only going to go one way, and it's a real positive for us. And the work of Bill Webb, Winnie, and all others in Toronto is fantastic to see those guys at least having an opportunity. They're not getting paid a fortune, those guys. Excuse me, by the way, but they are in a daily training environment. And as I say, the improvement is measurable, I think, every week, including the referees and everything else that goes with it. So we have to be positive about it. It's still a pathway, I guess. It's a stepping stone to overseas rugby. It should hopefully, if we have our best players in MLR, at some point those players should be aspiring to be playing in competitions in the northern and southern hemisphere. But I can see it, if it continues as it is, being a real meaningful competition. And the answer, I guess, the question is it preparing us for Test rugby? I don't think it is. It's not preparing players to play in international rugby in terms of the Pro 14 and other leagues, but it's certainly a step in the right direction and a chance for a young player to go and get to be experienced, a daily training environment 5 days a week.
Great, and I think to tie in the development conversation, there's a few different kinds of questions, all looking at how do you view the use of a sevens program in developing 15s players, or is that best left as a separate kind of development tool? And tied to that is, where does the Pride program or a centralized development program fit when it comes to both sevens and 15s?
Another good question. Basically, this is the early stages of bringing the Pride back, and I think if you come and see the guys in the environment, you've got Brock Webster, David Richard, etc., Quinn Nagwati, the list goes on. These guys are maybe both 15s and 7s, and in the example of David Richard and Brock, they're also under 20s. So we have to be careful how we manage those guys, because they are on everyone's watch list, and they're guys in everyone's progression chart pathway. So I think what we'd like to grow it to is 45, 50 players that you got 15 to 20 guys that probably will be the sevens players. You got another 5, 10 that could do both. That can their pathway could be into sevens and stay there. It could be into sevens, back into 15s. There are 1 or 2 or more than that. There are 4 or 5 players that will hopefully be appearing at the Olympics, but will also hopefully be playing 15s. I mean, Theo and Andrew Coe come to mind straight away. They are the players that have the ability to play both, and it's just sitting down with those players and making sure that they have a periodized plan. It's not just ad hoc, where they play sevens 1 week, 15s the next. That isn't fair to the player or the athlete. But Matt Barr is doing a lot of work on that side of things to make sure that we have a pathway. At the moment, we haven't spoken to those guys beyond the Olympics, the ones that are currently focused on that. Now, of course, things have moved in the last week, so we will sit down in about a fortnight's time once all this slows down, and we'll see which way this virus is going, and we'll be planning out, because at the moment we don't know if we've got July tests or an ARC. We should do, but at the moment, I guess, like everything else, it's in the balance. So the environment that they train in, some of the quick answer, the positives are, if we, in the past, for example, you take 13 to Hong Kong sevens, which is the number that you'd normally take, there's another 7 sevens players left behind. Now they're in a daily training environment. They're able to join in with the Pride's training program. Particularly, don't forget, 65, I would suggest 65, 70% of rugby, 7s and 15s, is generic skills. Catching, passing, running, tackling, it's generic skills. So there are aspects of 7s that are different to 15s, we know that, but those generic skills, at least at the moment, there's still coaches there. And then, of course, Henry Paul, who's coaching the 7s, when he's at home in the COE, he's involved in coaching the Pride program 15s as well. So we're actually putting those resources together. John Tate as well has been involved in coaching the 7s, men's 7s, in aspects of that game. So we're making the most of the resource, of the coaching resource, particularly with the program as it is.
Excellent. There's a ton of really good questions overall. I'm gonna try and piece them together with the flow of the conversation, knowing we're gonna move to some of the more technical / learnings that you took from the World Cup. Keep the questions coming, people. A few of you have your hands raised. It's a feature of the thing, of the webinar platform. If you could please type in your question. I don't know if I'll get to people with their hands up, and I don't know what question you want. So if you could please type those in, that would be great. Kingsley, I'm going to try and keep compiling these questions, but as you move forward, just feel free to let me know if you have anything you need me to do. Otherwise, if you can move on to our next piece around learnings from the World Cup, and then I'll keep working here for you.
Yeah, I got a number of slides here that I can share with you on my screen. I mean, I'll talk over a few and I'll maybe just show some of them as well. I can share my screen with you guys and girls. Here we have a look here. The biggest factors that we've learned as a team, as a coaching team, were, you know, the themes in the game. We often get asked about the kicking game. So why do we kick so much? I know Francois coached the girls to a very successful Rugby World Cup, and the way he played the game was ball in hand, and that suited the players, it suited the style of play. Why don't we see that from more countries? Well, I can put some slides up for you, and I can share them with you perhaps at the end of this. I'm happy to send them out. But if we look at 68% of tries in the World Cup, the source of possession is line out. Okay, so that source of possession is line out, and these also proven that you increase your chances of scoring by 70% once you enter the opposition's 22. So we know that we want to limit the amount of lineouts that the opposition get in your 22 because you're increasing their chances of scoring. So if we break that down, how do they get those lineouts? So for example, we went into the game against Italy with good scrum, no penalties, no lineouts. Now, firstly, teams squeeze you at the scrum, get penalties in the scrum around the halfway line. They're just inside their own half. That allows them the foothold to get into the 22, take the line out. Teams will score from the first phase or less than 4 phases. That's a big factor, characteristic coming out of the World Cup. Of course, South Africa had the best lineout in the World Cup, only losing 1 lineout all competition, the best scrum and the best defense. So there's no rocket science there. I think most of us know that. But the key thing is those lineouts, how do you minimize them? Well, good scrum, because that's where penalties are coming from. But if I was to tell you that average 7 penalties a game outside of set piece, they're at breakdown. And if I told you that 90% of those penalties at breakdown were for holding on, you better be good at your breakdown if you want to play a ball in hand style of play from 50 to 60 meters, even 40 meters from your own try line. Because if that is correct, that we are getting penalized for holding on and we overplay on the halfway line, give a penalty away for holding on, we now just increase the opposition's chances of scoring by 70% by giving them a line out in your 22. That's international rugby. This is why England, I've got some statistics that I picked up this morning. So Wales against South Africa in the World Cup, there were 62 kicks in the first 60 minutes, and 90% of those kicks were box kicks. Now, I can probably pause there because I'm going to go on why box kick, why not kick long, why not kick off. But they're good questions that come out of what I've just said as well. But if you go back to that statistic of the territory thing is everything. So the major factors coming from World Cup is the line out is the biggest way of scoring. The territory is still what it used to be. Possession is dropping. So possession used to be pretty important. It's not. It's showing from trends that having the ball doesn't really equate to you winning the match. The England in this Six Nations had the lowest possessions, but they had the highest returns for entries into the 22. So England got a big, physical, powerful team, obviously. So they'll go. Their game is to kick, be patient, wait until they get into 22, and then they will score. Or 90% of the time they'll score. Exeter Chiefs is an example. They're the best team in England, arguably at the moment. They won they've been in the finals and they're top of the league at the moment. An interesting stat I picked up from those this morning: Exeter scored 35 more tries last season, and if you add on to that a possible another 20 pick and go tries, you can see the basis of their game. So how do you beat Exeter? Obviously you've got to keep them out of your 22. How do you do that? You need good discipline. So they're the critical things that in terms of the actual shape of the game. We'll talk a little bit about the kicking as well, and maybe open what I've just said up to questions first. On the back of that, the last thing I'll throw in before we open it up is a real interesting one for me that we took from the World Cup was we always talk about being in the game and the last 15 minutes. 85% of the teams that led on 20 minutes won the game. And I think England epitomised that, the way they play the game. They come at you ferociously. They put everything into the first 20 minutes of the game. And we are seeing more and more of that. And I think that number really stood out to me after the World Cup. It might seem obvious. It didn't seem obvious to me. And that's something I'm really going to look at with our team. We always talk about starting well, but it's lip service. And I've talked to a lot of coaches around the world. I don't want to name drop too much, but I will. There's Steve Anson and these different Eddie Jones. And they tell me their whole week is focused on the first 20 minutes. And, spoke to the coaches who've been on the receiving end of trailing at 20 minutes, and they talk about the pressure that that puts on the players and the coaches and the way you think about the rest of the game. So I think that's a real interesting one as well for us to take in. Any questions on any of that piece before I move into some of the kicking stats?
Well, I mean, the first question was whether or not you were actually sharing your screen for some of that. I don't think you were, right, Kings?
I can do. If I'm honest, I'm trying. Excuse me. I'm doing my best to do different things. I could show some of those graphics. In fact, I will try while you look at the question. If you want, I'll show some of those statistics. I've got them on a PowerPoint. Let me see what I've got going. In the meantime, is there any questions on what I just said, Nate?
Yeah, so there's been a few around when to start developing kicking and at what in terms of maybe age groups or in terms of players' development, when would it be appropriate from a technical and or tactical perspective to introduce kicking into a team's program? And the second question on that is from a tactical perspective, if we were to kick the ball more, what does it mean in terms of having to then work on regaining possession? And is that an area where if we struggle too much in, do we then actually do the kicking to start with, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, they're both good questions. So the answer to the first question for me, I mean, I'm speaking as a dad. I got a 7-year-old boy here who plays soccer on Saturday morning. He's not in any rugby program, believe it or not, at the moment with me as his dad. But he he's been kicking a ball since he could walk. I mean, there's not a lot of the kicking aspect. Obviously, for the weather conditions we're in here as well, I had similar challenges with Russia. But soccer is a great way to start your kids kicking in terms of kicking the ball technically. There's so much to kicking as well. It's underestimated skill. The kicking coaches, there's different types of kick, and then there's the tactical aspect, as you asked the question there. So I think to answer the question when you should start kicking as early as possible, just kicking a ball, kicking it long, kicking it over the post, just having fun with it. The other thing I really encourage as well is kicking with both feet. Always encourage my kids, players I coach, is kicking with both feet. And it's earlier the better. I can honestly tell you now that we have kids that young men that come to us at 19, 20. And you know what? It's very difficult, particularly, obviously, we talk in the spine of the team here, the 9, the 10, the 15. It's very difficult for any coach and to make them world-class kickers if they have very, at minimum experience of it at 20, 21, 22. Of course, coaches improve players and improve their technicalities, but that neural pathway really needs to be in place at a young age, and then they just keep on practicing and keep on drilling it. To go to the tactical question, it's a really good one. So what I found, again, going back to the World Cup and a little bit looking at this year's Six Nations and talking to the coaches there. So an interesting one someone once told me was, because Wales will often kick long and on and then have a really good defensive line, and that their focus is defense. They spend a lot of their week preparing defense under Warren Gatland. It's changed recently, but for World Cup and prior to that, they focused on kicking it as long as they could. They have, again, good kickers of the ball. Where does that come into your tactics? Well, you need a 10 if you kick it a long way, another kicking option at 12, etc. But if that ball is kicked long and what we call it finding grass, if that ball doesn't find grass and bounce twice, there's a very good chance that the fullback or the winger, more often the fullback, will carry that ball back to an area that you could argue you could have got a contestable kick in, if that makes sense. So what we're seeing is, rather than have a risk of a fullback picking off bigger forwards and running back and having an opportunity to see what's in front of him, then creating a disorganized defense and playing off that, weakening the defense, we are seeing more contestable kicks. Because if you've got a 50% chance of getting it back off a contestable kick, why not do it? If you don't get it back, you can argue that your defensive line will be in place quicker than the attacking line to reload to start the counterattack. So this is why we're seeing a lot of that tactical box kicking to break the game up and to break up defenses, and you have a 50% chance of getting the ball back. Why don't we kick it off? Well, I think the first part of the conversation explains that. Why would we kick it off if we give them the opposition a line out within 25 meters, at least maybe 35 meters of our try line? We are now giving them another opportunity to score. And we've just evidenced that 70% of the time in your own 22, if you don't clear it very far, they have a 70% chance of scoring a try. So the biggest thing for us as coaches at schools and university level, I know I watched the university competition. It was great to see back in November, and that was a real positive for us. But there's a lot of encouragement about playing with ball in hand, which is a good thing. It's encouraging skills, breakdown skills. But are we coaching in game management that helps us perform at national team level? And that's a big difference in the high level, is game management from 9-10, kicking in the right areas, putting teams in the right positions, kicking the ball behind teams. Again, we see kicking it into the corner, rolling it into touch. The opposition have a line-out exit. The Arrows did this superbly well, by the way, against the Seawolves recently. They put the ball behind the behind the Seawolves. Seawolves failed to exit well, gave the Arrows a line-out 20, 30 meters out, and 3 times the Arrows capitalized on those lineouts twice they scored tries, the other times they got penalties. It was a great example of game management from the Arrows, and it was really encouraging to see. Now, we don't see a lot of game management in the MLR, and I guess that's down to experience in the halfbacks. But in the other level, and international level, they know the consequences of playing in the wrong area, so they kick more. And those are they're the main factors for. Sorry, so what I was going to get to is, if at 16, 17, 18, we could encourage our game controllers, the understanding of a box kick and how important it is, that's going to stand in good stead when they get to international level. If they play from 16 to 20 and they're not expected to kick, then again, we're picking these kids up at 20 and expecting to teach them to kick, and often from scratch, different types of kick.
Great, thanks, Kings. There's some questions around defense, but if you don't mind, Kingsley, I think what we'll do is we'll leave that at the moment for our next presentation from Jamie Cudmore that I'll announce later, which is a focus on defense. And so if you don't mind, maybe what we'll do is we'll move into what you had next from a technical or tactical perspective from the World Cup. And then I'd like to tie in some of the questions around the gap a little bit later. So I'll let you move on to your next piece, and then I'll keep compiling these for you.
And that was, is there any questions around that kicking piece, Nath? Because
I mean, most of the rest of them are on defending it and trying to regain possession through your defensive strategy. And I think, if you don't mind, I mean, feel free to throw something out there. I'm just trying to make sure we get as much of you as possible on other topics. But and I know Jamie Cudmore is going to do a defensive piece next week. So up to you how you want to deal with that. If you're happy to move on to the next piece, or just quickly address that one.
No, I can touch on that one. The surprising stat, I'm not sure if I mentioned already, actually, but, the tackle count is really surprising at the higher level, and it all relates to the kicking. So we're seeing 85 tackles a game as an average, whereas in a Pro 14 game, a Super Rugby game, we are seeing 150 tackles per game. And that explains makes it easier on the defense. There's less tackling, less stress. It's not as great to watch, obviously, but that has become a common theme: a low tackle count. if you look at how you base your week should reflect your game and the strengths of your team. So if you're going to kick it long and on, for example, like Wales, it suggests you spend a lot of time on your line discipline, etc. And that's something that South Africa, best line out, best scrum, best defense. So obviously they often kick long and on as well. But again, we know they got big, strong, physical men who can make one-on-one tackles and often win collisions. So that's part of that. I won't take any more of that because Jamie will pick up on it. But they're the key framework things that we sort of took from it. I think. Let me turn this. Let's turn this off a second. The other thing I'd like to mention that we took from as well, obviously playing against those really high level teams of the All Blacks and the Springboks in particular. We often talk about playing fast, all coaches. And again, speaking to some of the Northern Hemisphere coaches just yesterday that have just coached in the Six Nations, and they said exactly, what does it mean? What does playing fast mean? Well, the biggest thing we took from the All Blacks was the All Blacks beat you when the ball is dead. That's when they play fast. And that was a big learning for me because we all want to play fast. I don't think anyone really wants to play slow unless there's circumstances with yellow cards and scoreboard. So what they will do is they will beat you when the ball is dead. What do I mean by that? There was a game where the opposition managed to clear their decks from about 60 meters out, and they put a lovely kick into the corner, entered the New Zealand 22, rolled into touch. New Zealand line out in their own 22. And while the team who kicked the ball were all tapping each other on the back and congratulating each other on a great kick, the All Blacks actually, from the time the ball left the player's boot to the time they'd scored in the other corner, the All Blacks, was 26 seconds. They went back, they got there, they executed a four-man line-out, they played it through the hands, went wide, and scored. Now, that is what is playing quick. It's playing quick between those breaks in play, and I really learned a lot from that. I don't mind saying it. One of our targets when we played the All Blacks was to stop that happening. It's negative, I guess, but we didn't approach it as being totally negative, but we approached it as being, we need to stop them doing what they want and what they like doing, and we need to frustrate them. So we slowed the process of scrums down. We slowed the process of those lineups down where, when, and possible. How do you do that? Taking the gap, getting hold of the ball first. As I say, that can be seen as a negative, but for us, it was one of our KPIs. Could we manage to do that? And that was to frustrate and slow the All Blacks down. And that's what other teams as well will do with their Springboks, always tried to do that with them, etc. But that was a massive learning as well from World Cup, was the fact that, we talk about playing fast and how they did that between the ball being out of play was really impressive. Any questions on that?
Kingsley, you kind of transitioned into the line out a little bit, which I think is going to address a couple of questions here that seem relevant from a tactical perspective when we look at our line out stats and how we did with ball or with possession at the line out or the throw-in at the line out, whether or not there was a decision made at some point to maybe adjust our tactics around how often we wanted the line out. And then a second question around the lineout is, why does the lineout seem to have more success rate in terms of tries inside the 22 than, say, a scrum inside the 22?
Yeah, good questions. I think the first one on us getting lineouts is obviously we want to increase our number of lineouts. How do we do that? So there you go again. It's the flip really of what I said. So we want to put the ball behind them. One of our massive focuses for the Rugby World Cup was pressure high up the field. We'd reward players. Richard Wigglesworth was doing the defense and kicking and pressure. So if a player got a charge down in training, he would get a Mars bar or a bar of chocolate. A simple thing, but if he got a charge down in a game, they were getting a wristwatch. Only a cheap wristwatch, I will say, less than $10, but it became a bit of fun. But why are we doing that? Because another thing I see in the MLR, the amount of time kickers are allowed to kick the ball, it allows, so how can we affect a really effective kick? it's pressure. And that is international rugby, it's pressure. So we worked a lot on getting the ball up the field, like other teams did, putting the ball behind teams when it was right, when they had everybody in the defensive line or just one in the backfield. And what our intention was to put that ball into a position which was difficult to kick from. And then it was all about having a chaser who was really going to put that kicker under pressure at giving us, one, a counter-attacking opportunity from a poor kick, which we feel we're strong at. We feel that's a big strength of ours. We've got good back three players particularly. And the other was to give us that launch, that line out high up the field that we know increases our chances of scoring. So that's what we did to have a crack at those things. I think the key thing I was going to summarize at the end here, but the key thing for us all is the importance of 2, 9, 10, 8, 10, 12, 15, sorry, to make sure that spine and the line have core skills. If we're talking here about winning lineouts that give us tries, we must be able to throw the ball in. That's a critical skill. If we are talking about field position from scrums and lineouts and mauls and rucks, we need our 9s to be able to kick accurately, 10s to kick accurately, fullbacks to kick accurately. Those key skills and those decision makings are critical to. So for us to get a lineout, you obviously need to have good success in your lineout. An interesting one for us, Wales 3 years ago, 4 years ago, had a very poor lineout success completion rate. Because they were trying to win the ball at the back quite a lot, to get the backs going, to get the gain line. The line-out statistic improved dramatically, but then you break it down to where you're winning the ball. So more often than not, teams will give you the front of the line-out because it's easy to defend from the front of a line-out. It gives the backs more time to get up to the defensive line or to the tackle line. So it's all good having the 100% line-out, but what is the quality of that ball? It has to be really taken into consideration. So interestingly for us, when we went down to 14 men against the Springboks, we had a challenge at halftime. The players were excellent. We actually decided to go with 4-man lineouts, which makes perfect sense. We lost the second row. And we had 100% on our 4-man lineout in the second half and the end of the first half. But again, was that possession useful to us? So that's the challenge around winning your lineouts. It's good to have a statistic. It's what you do with that and where you can win the ball. So to go to the question of why is it a good area to score from? The first one is the maul. You know, a big chunk of that 70% or 68% of tries from lineout will come from a driving maul. And that's very difficult to stop against big physical teams, as we know. Technically, you can be good, but the bigger they are, the harder they hit you, unfortunately. And so that is why it's such a strength of South Africa, England. So they will score a lot from a maul. And then, of course, the pick and go, where you're talking picking and going, you pick up and you go half a meter. There's not too many times you have to do that, obviously, from 5 meters out. So they add to those numbers quite a lot, significantly. But less than 4 phases as well, when you think you have to potentially defend a maul, so the forwards will stay low and stay tight because they have to defend that maul potentially. The ball then is peel to defend, so you have to have some structures in place to defend the peel. And then, of course, you have to defend wide if they go wide off it. So it's not as structured as a scrum start to launch. And of course, with scrums now as well, it's getting better. But why teams elect for a line out over a scrum is often because you're putting it back in the hands of the referee. So if you have a penalty and you see teams saying, we'll go to the corner for the line out, you think, why not go for the scrum? It's often because you're giving the opposition, you're increasing the chance of the opposition getting the penalty and getting the ball back, or you know what the battle can be at the scrum now, and 60% of those penalties will go to the team that introduced the ball, but that other 40% can go against you. And with so many scrums ending in penalties, that's possibly why we are seeing the numbers go to lineouts and teams going to the lineout as a source to score rather than scrum. Yeah, and the other thing on that as well, England particularly, scoring, interesting stat from the World Cup, again, 85% of teams that won scored more tries than the opposition. So there's 2 exceptions. I think it was a Uruguay against Fiji game one other game, I'd be wrong to guess, I think it was France in another game, but those teams were won by the team who scored the most tries. Now, that's a big change from 8 years ago. We were seeing teams winning by penalties and drop goals. So what that also shows is the momentum piece that players like teams like England, if they get a penalty, even in the first 10 minutes, if they got a penalty and it's a chance to go to the corner or a chance to take the points, more often than not, they'll go to the corner and make that 7 points rather than 3 and back themselves to do that. So that's a slight change in the trend of the game as well. Teams, coaches and players realizing how important tries are over penalties.
Great, thanks, Kingsley. I'm going to try and tie in a lot more of these questions for you from a coach's perspective. When you look at the tactical and technical needs of your players, what would a training session look like when you're working on those driving mauls, whether it's on attack or defense? Are there anything specific from a training perspective that you're doing to try and reflect what you're trying to accomplish in the game?
Yeah, I think I'm all about. I'm really big on this, and you know, the training has to reflect the game. The challenge of international rugby in a pro club, you got 44 weeks to work on different aspects, and we might spend 2 weeks focusing on the maul. We might spend a week focusing on defence. It often depends on the opposition in those scenarios, but for us, obviously, we really need to identify what's important to our team. I also a big believer, this is a personal thing, that we overanalyze the opposition and we can lose our identity. A lot of coaches overcoach. One thing Warren Gatlin I learned from spending time watching him, he will not have overcoaching. And speaking to Tyler Ardron recently, it's a bit of a change down the Chiefs, so if you don't mind me saying, but they've gone from long sessions to short sessions, often feeling as if they haven't done enough. And that's his style. And I believe in that as well. I think certainly in terms of looking at the opposition too much. I think if you continue to worry about the opposition, you spend your week preparing on how they're going to try and break you down rather than how you can break them down. Now, again, there's an element of that. You look at the potential weaknesses. At the end of the day, I believe you should be doing what you're good at and focusing on what's important in that game to come. You'd be a bit naive not to focus on your defensive, your driving maul if you were playing England or South Africa. Likewise, if you're playing Ireland, you really need to be good aerially because they have some of the best aerial players. They kick a lot and to get the ball back and from every area of the field. So I think that shapes your week a little bit. You're naive not to have some focus on that. But knowing the strength of your team, the identity of your team, and coaching and making sure you stay on top of those areas. There's always your set pieces that are critical through the week of work. There's always your defensive bits, your breakdown bits. But for me, another area that is really critically important that often as coaches we don't cover off enough is the breakdown. We talked here about a number of lineouts in a game. It can be 10, it can be 15 perhaps. And I see coaches spending a good 4 hours of their week, maybe 5 hours of their week, including analysis on lineouts. When we have 15 of them, how much time do we spend on the breakdown when we have 150 of them perhaps? So those are the critical things. Is something we do is we have a pie of the week and we have a perfect week of what we need to spend our time on aspects of the game. And we try to mirror that week, which is important to the identity of our team and also take into consideration the opposition. I guess at the lower level, I would be all about concentrating on the key aspects of your team. Have you got a big pack that can score from a maul? Have you got a small, fast pack? Do you need to play tap penalties, turnovers? Do you practice those transitions a lot? And the other piece, of course, is core skills. There's always has to be a place for core skills, where it's 15 minutes of catch pass, because I see we talk about quickly on that. How many of us actually, we've all done it as coaches, we spend 2 hours a week on our phase shape, which means, do we play 3 forwards from the edge with a 10 at the back, 2 forwards in midfield? Well, that phase shape is important. It gives us some structure. But most teams will only go into that shape between their opposition 22 and the halfway line, because we just established we're going to kick for everywhere else. If we're spending 2 hours a week on that phase shape, you have to ask yourself, how much time are we spending attacking in that area? If that's only 3 instances in a game, why are we spending our week concentrating on that phase shape? Of course, as I say, it's important, but these are things you got to think. If you're going to play from the length of the field, then your phase shape is very, very important, and you need to practice that. So those are the types of things I'd be looking at for my team. What are my teams? What's his identity? What's his strengths? And really focusing on those things, and obviously touching on all the other aspects that you need to.
Great, thanks, Kings. I know we're running lowish on time. I mean, we can try and extend it a few minutes, obviously, and try and get to as much as we can. I'd like to tie in a couple of questions here from a Canadian perspective. So it's kind of 2 parts. One is, where do you think the trends of the game are going, and how do we help our players be able to adapt to that, whether it's to modernize it to our own needs, or whether or not it's to be able to do it better than anyone else, and how does that affect an entire team structure when it comes to both coaches, players, S&C, management? How is the whole team structure affected by these trends in the game, and how we want to try and get to where we want to get to?
Well, I think we often reinvent the wheel. There's things going around. I see new ideas, new mauls, new peels. They're not new. You forget some things. You forget that we were doing in 1988 on a park in Abu Vale. But they come back around. They come back into fashion. A maul that stands up. Argentina tried a little bit. So you create a maul from open play. That was a common theme, but all of a sudden it's like, wow, there's many things that are just go round in circles. The biggest change in where I see the game going, and I say unfortunately, because I was, I'm not a very big fella. To play number 7 at international level is always a challenge, and I think we're getting bigger and faster. Particularly the speed is really critical. We often see now the athlete selected and being coached to play rugby rather than a really good rugby player who's got game sense, but he might be a little bit small. We're seeing those guys slip by the wayside at the professional level, unfortunately. We say the All Blacks are not the biggest team. We say that because we see the young halfback, Aaron Smith, and we see the 10. They're not the biggest in the world, but if you look at the rest of the team, believe me, they are big guys, and they're big, fast guys. And you have to be exceptional now to be playing in positions, particularly in the front 5, particularly in the centres. You have to be exceptionally gifted to play at the top level. So that's the way I see the game going. And as I said, I do say unfortunately, because there is no doubt about it. If you have all the ability and you're big, fast, and strong, stronger than the opposite man, you're going to come out on top. So the other thing, we see too much structure. I think there's too much structure in coaching, and I think the Southern Hemisphere are far better than coaching, playing what's in front of you than the Northern Hemisphere. And I think we've got to be better at that. I think we try to encourage that here. We should be creating scenarios for players to attack against, rather than explaining this is what we're attacking, this is our attacking shape from this area of the field. I see a lot of that, and I think that's going backwards. We need to be creating scenarios, and this is where we are, and this is how the opposition have set up. What are we going to do? That's the sort of scenario coaching I think is we're going to see more of, I hope. But in terms of the game, I just think I would like to say it's going to get more ball in hand, high skill, faster. But the amount of kicking we're seeing, for the reasons I said, is telling a different story to what I'd like to see. But we certainly will see bigger, faster, stronger players all the time. Is the way I see it going.
Great. I'm going to try and run through a battery of them here, Kingsley, for you, and then we can try and wrap this up in the next couple of minutes. One of the questions that came around was, are you seeing from club rugby players developing into the possibility at some point of playing professional or international rugby? Are we seeing clubs able to deliver or provide or help develop the size of players that we require? And if not, how can they maybe help, or is that important?
I think that if we're talking the younger players, there's a lot of really good young rugby players in Canada, really good. You know, I believe Gethin watches on the call actually, and Gethin's been involved in my own view is at 16, 17, I'm seeing kids as good as anywhere else I've worked, you know, in England, Wales, Russia. There's a lot of good rugby players. The challenge is, look, if we had an amateur World Cup, an amateur rugby World Cup, we would be right up there. We could win it. But unfortunately, the rest of the world are a full-time professional. And we're not talking about getting guys together and giving them 6 weeks in a gym and getting them fit and strong. We're talking a training age. You know, these guys have been doing it 10 years. You know, I turn up at the Dragons at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, 2 days a week. Of the 2 days of that week, there'd be a car park full of parents taking their kids to the training, like you do in ice hockey or like you do in hockey. And if you don't make that training session, there'll be another kid that steps in. But the point being, they're 15 years old and they're already have a training age. They know how to lift correctly. They know how to squat correctly. They know how to catch, jump, lift, all that. They know how to behave. They know what to eat. They know when to sleep. And all that period, that there for 5, 6 years from the age of 15 sometimes, but from 18 to 23, that's where these fellas are falling behind because of that and the lack of that opportunity to be able to do that. Now, we've got some very bright people in this country as well. So these young men have got other opportunities. You know, there's guys who can graduate and become an engineer and earn $80,000 a year straight out of school. You don't get that in where I come from, believe me. So it's a real avenue for people to earn a good living and play sport. But we really don't have that avenue. So I think the answer to the question is I think there's a lot of really good work being done. It's just the pathway piece that is a challenge, because these players really need to be playing at a highly level regularly to be able to compete at international level when they're called upon to do so. And that's the challenge for us, is that professional domestic league. And the Arrows, thankfully, are there, and there's other Canadians playing in other MLR teams, which is a step in the right direction. Plus, of course, those guys I mentioned playing in some good clubs overseas. And a lot of those guys are playing now. When I first arrived here, we had, I think, 10 players overseas, but very few of them were playing regularly. They were just there making up squad numbers, which was not good for their preparation for international rugby either.
Okay, we're going to try and squeeze in 2 more here, Kings. What do you think in terms of developing a Canadian identity of the game, and does that need to trickle from the top all the way down, versus are we then creating players that are too robotic and don't have enough creativity or maybe game understanding to be able to adapt to different scenarios in the game? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any real need for alignment in structures and things a Canadian way until we get to our age group level. I think it discourages coaches as well to coach to have their impact on what they think the strengths of their team are, to be creative in their coaching. I think when we get to 18s, for me, if they can make national under 18s, then that's still a lot of that preparation week goes to individual development. When we get to 20s, you know, we are introducing, through some of the good work we've been doing in the last few months with the heads of the provincial rugby there, Francois Moff, tackle, Jack, others. You know, it's something we're trying to align for our age groups, something common language, if you like, so that we create our own language in terms of what we call moves, strike plays, terminology. That's a good thing to do. But I don't think until we get to our U20s, we should be having a common theme. As for what's a Canadian way, I think what we need to look at for the next 4-year cycle is, do we have the front five that is going to enable us to get back to where we need to be in world rugby? That's a critical piece. We can't play without a front five. You know, it's as simple as that. It might be negative, but if we're going to have a scrum and we're going to have 50% of those scrums into penalties, we're going to end up, as we already established, having lineups in our own 22 and giving the chance to the opposition to score. So maybe we do need to play with a bit more ball in hand. It suits us. We have very strong, fit athletes. I think our our athletes are special in terms of their size, aerobic capacity. We have some great guys, shaped, narrow at the hips, big and strong. Same with speed. We've got a lot of speed. We got brave guys. So we have all the chances. Just we really need to invest in our front five and the spine of that team being given an opportunity to throw the ball in the line out every day at a high level, or every week at a high level. And same for the nines, as we already established. I think we still need to be good at the fundamentals, obviously. But the other thing as well is creating counter-attacking opportunities. If we can create those counter-attacking opportunities, we can score tries. We came up very low on the entries into the 22, but we actually, in the World Cup statistics, we didn't have a lot of possession because probably the teams we played against. The numbers are a little bit skewed, by the way, for Canada because we didn't get that fourth game. So, to play three big teams like we didn't get that fourth game, the numbers are skewed. We would have come out better, I guess, in certain aspects. And the same for Namibia as well, of course. But if we can create counter-attacking opportunities through pressure, high work rate chasing, which we do well, then we can score some really good tries with the athletes that we have in the country.
Absolutely. Last one, Kingsley. Can you provide a light-hearted, webinar-friendly story from the Rugby World Cup experience, something that will probably stick with you for a long, long time?
You caught me on the off there. I think that's Al Sharon who's planted that one, but I can tell you a funny one actually, just to show how bright the Welsh are. So we're going across on the ferry to our camp before we play USA, and I call a Welshman, a friend of mine, and I said, we are just boarding the ferry to go through the islands. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a clear day. The sun is out. I said, with a bit of luck, we'll see whales today. And the guy I was talking to said to me, you can see whales from Victoria? Not Wales as in Wales, Wales as in, he thought Wales in the UK. So that reminds me of my journey leaving for the World Cup. But I won't tell you the fella's name either. You probably heard of him. But yeah, that's all I got.
Outstanding. Okay, thank you. I know we weren't able, obviously, to get to everyone's specific questions. I tried my best to group as many of them along the lines of the themes that we were talking about. I want to say a big thank you to Kingsley Jones once again for his time today, as well as to all of you for having joined us. Just to put this out there, we don't yet have a full schedule of webinars complete, but we will have Jamie Cudmore on next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, time subject to change at this point, but he will be going over some defense conversations with us. Kingsley, anything you want to sign off with?
No, thanks. It's a tough time for everyone, and particularly the community game. It's just critical to us that we keep growing the grassroots and we keep investing, particularly in our coaches. And just like to say that, we really need to not only invest in players, we need to invest in our coaching, and the MLR is a pathway for coaches as well. I haven't been that visual up to World Cup, but believe me, we were all hands on deck. Where hopefully we can share a lot more and make sure that we are growing people, and hopefully we can support coaches, and there's a pathway into some professional or semi-professional environment for us to grow Canadian coaches. And it's part of what I'm trying to do. Jamie has been fantastic to be around, just having him with me, being on my own, growing the team with the help of the management, of course, and S&C, but having a rugby person to share with every day is critical. And we're open to, we've got a talent ID list of potential coaches for 23, 24. Jamie will be assisting me for this coming season. Hopefully we get some games in it, of course, and we will be looking out for other coaches as well. And we want to grow those through our age groups and through other pathways. So that's a big piece that we really want to focus on. Talent ID piece. I know there's a lot of good scouts out there that have been helping us in setting that up. Critical we have a register, we can create pathways, we can for individual players, we can support where they need support, so that's essential as well. So yeah, I put my hand up to do another one of these if needed anytime. I've had my in-laws here for 2 weeks, so you can imagine how I am right now. They've just left yesterday, thankfully, for the UK. So I'm able to pick up on some of this as well. Give me a little bit of notice, and we can discuss aspects of game, coaching philosophies, anything. So thanks for paying in. I've never had a captive audience before of so many people. So I hope you enjoyed it and it made some sense. So thank you.
Outstanding. Thanks again, once again, to Kingsley Jones. Quick reminder, we are under suspension of rugby activities outdoors or in groups or training or courses at the moment. We will have an update for you guys shortly in the next week or so on where that stands. In the meantime, please look for future announcements regarding these webinars. We will be having one, like I said, next Tuesday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, with Jamie Cudmore talking about defense. Time subject to change, but that will be made public very shortly. Thanks again, Kingsley, and hopefully we'll chat to you soon, mate.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks. Have a good day.